Teal paint and zigzag stripes. If your eyes can tolerate the late 80s aesthetics we got going on here, I have quite a few things to talk about with this car, so let's dive right in. Hello everyone and welcome! Today's video is going to be a little showcase of one of my most recent builds, that being this 1985 Chevrolet Camaro Z28 in 1/24 scale. There is a bit of a story with this car, and I'll be showing off some things that I really like about it, and then some things that didn't exactly go to plan. If nothing else, it was a good opportunity to experiment and learn a few things, and that's always a good thing, so let's go ahead and start first by talking about the car itself. 1985 was the fourth model year of the third generation Chevrolet Camaro. While largely unchanged from the prior model years, 1985 would see a number of refinements both cosmetically and mechanically. Perhaps most notably were the new 5-liter tuned-port injection V8 and the introduction of the IROC-Z package. Taking its name from the International Race of Champions, a spec racing series that exclusively utilized Camaros during this period, the IROC-Z package was optional on the Z28, including a variety of both cosmetic and performance enhancements. The body from this particular car comes from a 1/24 scale monogram model kit. Having a look at this particular model over on scalemates.com shows that it's been around for quite a while, originally sold as a snap kit with numerous issues over the years, including the most recent one being this here from Revell in 2022. I have a couple of these kits sitting around, in particular the 2012 issue, which came in a box that looks like this. This particular issue uses the Monogram brand, but it's the exact same kit, with Monogram and Revell being under the same ownership for many years at this point. Do note, however, that some of the other 3rd Gen Camaro and Firebird model kits you may have seen previously on this channel that were produced by AMT or MPC are not the same tooling as this kit here. While those kits may be replicating essentially the same car, those kits are in 1/25th scale, so they are ever so slightly smaller, and therefore those bodies require a slightly different size chassis to this one here. These are great kits that build up into a nice looking model. However, I think one thing to keep in mind if you're looking to build one of these 85 Camaros is, in my opinion, I think the latest issue from 2022 might be the one to get. The reason for this being the much better decal sheet that it includes. It's clearly more comprehensive with more options to choose from than this one here that's included in this 2012 issue. You have more decals that will match a wider variety of interior and exterior colors. So something to keep in mind depending on how exactly you're wanting to build one of these cars. But minor details like that aside, they're all pretty much the same kit and seem to be readily available. They go together well, though I have found that a fair bit of trimming and sanding is necessary to get the best fitment, but if you're willing to spend the time test fitting everything initially to ensure proper fitment, it'll build up into a great looking car. Now this particular body that I have here was originally painted black and was sort of a basher body on an RC chassis that didn't really look all that great. It's been sitting on the shelf for years at this point. I played around with this car for a while more recently to see if I could strip off all of that paint and make it look a little better than it did before. I was able to remove the paint pretty successfully with some old brake fluid, though I can't imagine it's particularly great for the plastic. If you're trying to strip the paint off of a model kit like this, or something that you really care about, definitely do some research on that. But eventually I got to the point that you're seeing here, where I have it in primer, ready for a new, hopefully much better coat of paint. And believe me, I've got something kind of rad in mind for this particular car, but more on that in just a bit. But one rather unique element of this car that you may have noticed is this rear hatchback. This is a custom-built styrene edition. At one point I misplaced the clear windshield and rear glass piece that would have been included in this kit. Normally this isn't always that big of a deal when you're dealing with a flat piece of glass or something a little less complicated like a windshield, but these cars had a pretty large and curvy piece of glass in the rear. In fact, on the real cars, I believe it was a rather difficult and expensive piece to manufacture, which proved to be a bit of a challenge for the vendors GM had commissioned. A combination of being rather large, one piece, and then the curvature and overall shape, as well as I think the glass was largely structural in the sense that it didn't have an outer perimeter with gaskets that the window would be set into. They had to incorporate a number of holes in the glass itself where the rear deck lid and hinges would be mounted. Kind of an interesting design if you're a car nerd like me and are fascinated by a lot of the engineering that goes into these vehicles. It looks great, but not exactly an easy piece of clear plastic for me to have to reproduce. So my simpler solution here was to just replicate one of these aftermarket fiberglass monstrosities that would have been available back in the day. I wouldn't necessarily say it looks great, but I don't hate it either. The fit and finish isn't exactly amazing, but I can't imagine the real-life equivalent would have necessarily been immaculate either. Now, from the factory on the Camaro's F-body sibling, the Firebird, there was a very rare notchback option for the 1988 model year that actually looks pretty good, and from a performance perspective, it seems like there would be the potential to save some weight by not having that giant piece of glass in the rear. This design, in my opinion, looks a lot better than some of the aftermarket ones that I've seen, but I didn't really capture that look with this one that I built here. To each their own, of course. I'm sure back in the day somebody somewhere convinced someone that their 80s Firebird or Camaro was a Ferrari with these aftermarket kits. It looks like a great way to take a car that normally has pretty good rear visibility and cargo space and reduce both simultaneously. Although again, I'd have to imagine that you could probably shed quite a bit of weight by removing that large rear glass. But hey, what I have here is certainly unique in the world of 85 Camaro 124 scale models. One of a kind, in fact, so for whatever that's worth, I've got that going for me. Of course, I did manage to locate the correct front and rear windows for this car more recently, but I'm still going to rock the rear hatch just the way it is. We're going to really embrace the late 80s or 90s custom look with this project. It's not like it's a real car, so might as well have a little fun with it. I could have done worse, I suppose. Another thing about this car is, unfortunately, I am still missing the clear headlights, and also one of the taillights is damaged. So I'm going to have to get a bit creative with the solution there. More on that in just a bit. Now, as far as the chassis underneath, this is our FFR SC1 3D printable chassis design featuring our MA10 rear axle assembly and an FCO1 front suspension and steering assembly. All of the STL files for this chassis can be found over on our Patreon, along with more information and tutorials. All of these parts are designed to be 3D printable on a typical hobby grade machine. However, choosing a smaller size nozzle is going to be a requirement for some of these tiny components. This chassis design here will be a familiar sight to regular viewers of this channel, as will the electronics. I'm once again utilizing a Radiolink RC6GS transmitter and R4 FGM receiver. Considering this car has some rock-hard tires from a plastic model kit, that built-in gyro could certainly come in handy to keep the oversteer in check. I've also got one of our up to 3S LiPo-compatible ESCs and a 4000 RPM N20 motor. Initially, I had the idea to utilize one of these N20 motor and gearbox assemblies to transfer power from a brushless motor to the rear wheels. Certainly a bit of a crude experiment that worked for a bit, but that higher power brushless motor did eventually blow up the gears, so it was worth a try, I suppose. Unfortunately, there isn't really a lot of brushless motor and gear reduction assemblies that mimic the drivetrain layout of a real vehicle. I'd like to have a longitudinally mounted motor with the gearbox just behind it, just like what you would see on the real car. But when you look at a lot of the brushless RC crawler or drift chassis in smaller scales like these, I've yet to find one that has the correct motor mount and drivetrain arrangements that I can make work with this chassis here. But regardless, that N20 motor will still provide plenty of torque and make the car fun to drive around a track. Keeping with the junkyard theme of this Camaro, pretty much all of the parts on this chassis were sourced either from other projects that I was parting out or parts that I just had sitting around. There are very few items that I actually needed to 3D print for this chassis specifically, as it's pretty much composed of items that were laying around, and I just decided one evening to put it all together and get to the point that you see here. These centerline style wheels and compatible tires were included in a Revell 1970 Chevelle kit that I had some parts left over from a previous build. I think they pair really nicely with this car and look like a period correct aftermarket wheel. As I've talked about and showcased in some previous videos, oftentimes you can modify the wheels and tires included in a model kit to work with an RC chassis like this. Some work was required, but they ended up working pretty nicely, although these tires are rock hard, so they won't provide much traction. It's probably worth pointing out that we have a centerline style wheel design of our own over on Patreon that is compatible with the FFR SC1 chassis. Unlike these wheels that were included with a model kit, you won't have to modify them and glue them to the axles as I've done here. These are a conventional RC style wheel that will be held onto the axle with a nut, making them easily removable, although perhaps with a slight compromise on the scale aesthetics. This wheel design here is included in our muscle car wheel pack 2, it's design number 4. I'm currently working on some 3D printable tire designs that could be printed in a soft material like TPU, but you can also find compatible silicone slicks on our website, or utilize a tire that was included in a model kit to fit around this wheel, which I believe has an outer diameter of around 18mm. If you need this wheel in a slightly different size though, feel free to send a message. Now, as far as getting this body mounted to the chassis, you'll see I have 4 magnets, one on each corner. I ended up cutting this piece of styrene in the front to have a place to secure these magnets while still allowing the hood to be openable. As you can see with that front-mounted steering servo, there isn't a lot of room between the hood and the top of that servo, so I had to cut out an opening, but it all fits and I was able to get the body to sit at the correct height on the chassis. This car is going to be more of a driver, so I'm not worried about adding an interior or engine bay, but I guess I could if I wanted to, as the hood can still be opened. I simply placed a small magnet onto the underside to keep it closed while driving. Now is probably a good time to mention that recently here on the channel, I have posted a video showing how I like to mount these model car bodies onto these RC chassis, and I also made a standalone video showing all of the electronics I like to use for these smaller scale projects. So if you're interested in building something similar to what I have here, those are definitely some good videos to check out. I'll have them linked below in the description. But at this point, the car is fully put together and functional, but obviously lacking a bit in appearance. With this car being more of a driver or something to race around the track, I'm not overly concerned about achieving a high level of scale detail. I thought this would instead be a good opportunity to experiment with a few things and see how they turn out. First though, I needed to get this primer sanded down in order to remove any imperfections that might still remain and get the body ready for paint. As I said, I'm not going for perfection here, but I just wanted to get everything at least reasonably smooth and remove any imperfections that might still remain. Also, since this car won't have any sort of interior, I wanted to go ahead and cut some pieces of clear plastic for the side and rear windows. This is very easy to do simply by cutting and then placing a small piece of paper behind the opening and then just tracing it out. From there, it can be used as a stencil to cut the pieces of clear plastic to the correct shape, making sure to oversize them at least a little bit to make them easier to glue into place later on. These clear plastic pieces, along with the windshield included with the model kit, will be painted black on the inside to hide the vehicle's lack of interior. But with that done, I went ahead and thoroughly washed the body and then applied the paint. I decided I'd go with sort of an 80s or 90s era custom paint job. I got inspired by some of the designs and colors that you'd see on some custom vehicles from this era. This type of thing is well outside my wheelhouse though, but I decided I would try something a little different here with this car and experiment with some new techniques. I actually started out in Photoshop trying to come up with some kind of simple design that I could mask and then airbrush. Nothing over the top here, but just something to add a little bit of 80s flair. I've been told that a painter could put his kids through college back in the day, painting zigzag stripes onto cars, trucks, vans, and boats, so I thought I would incorporate that into my design here. Just a little bit of a rad touch there on the lower portion of the doors. I thought it was looking pretty good, so what I ended up doing was I wanted to try a little experiment here and see if I could actually 3D print some stencils that I could use while airbrushing. What I did was transfer that image that I created over in Photoshop, and then I traced it out onto a sketch in Autodesk Fusion, which I could either export as a DXF file for 2D printing, or thicken slightly to make it 3D, and then export as a STL file for 3D printing. Now, really the right tool for the job here would be something like a desktop cutter, like those sold by Cricut for example. That would give me the opportunity to cut sticker paper and create actual masking decals, but as I don't have any machines like that, I thought I would try doing something similar by 3D printing the design thin enough to be able to use as a mask. We'll see how that goes later on. Perhaps a bit unorthodox, but just a bit of an experiment here I wanted to try out, but as you can see, I went ahead and started applying the paint. I went through all of the cans that I had in my stash and ended up choosing this color here. Kind of a teal, I guess, though I thought it would sort of fit the 80s and 90s vibes that I'm going for. I've never expected perfection when I'm using these Rust-Oleum rattle cans to paint these bodies, but overall the paint turned out looking pretty nice. A little bit of orange peel and some imperfections here and there, but not too bad. However, unfortunately, there was just a ton of trash in the paint. Can't really tell on video, but just a lot of dust and chunks of stuff. I know the shop is far from a sterile environment, but man, you'd think I painted this in like a horse barn or something. Even by my standards, there's a lot of junk in there, so what I ended up doing was going ahead and doing some wet sanding to try and get things at least moderately smooth. I think I just started with some 1000 grit sandpaper and worked my way to finer and finer grits, doing my best not to burn through the paint, but just get it nice and uniform, especially on those large flat areas. Now this is where I was ready to put my 3D printed stencils to the test. As you can see, they're very thin, and I was looking forward to seeing how useful they may be for projects like this. I went ahead and started with the base layer, which will be silver. I positioned the stencil in place and then taped around it. This worked out pretty well, but once again I had some issues when peeling off the masking, with it taking some of the paint off with it. This may be a result of using full-scale automotive masking tape rather than the stuff specifically designed for models. Over the years I've generally had pretty good luck using full-scale automotive masking tape, but as I've had some issues with some of the more recent projects here, I'm wondering if sticking with the stuff specifically designed for plastic models could mitigate these types of issues. I don't necessarily see a huge difference in the material or stickiness, aside of course from the price, but I'm not really sure what's going on here, but for now I just went ahead and fixed it and moved on. The stencil at least proved to work well, so at least there's that. Unfortunately from there, things kind of went from bad to worse as I decided to try using floor polish rather than applying a clear coat. Using floor polish, this brand in particular being one that I've seen recommended, has been a trick used by model builders for years. It provides a great shine and doesn't require any spraying, as you have the option of simply laying it down with a brush, just as I'm doing here. It self-levels very well and dries nice and smooth and crystal clear. However, I think I may have applied this quick shine too soon after painting, as it began to form cracks and spiderwebs, not exactly a great result. So at this point we're actually going to jump ahead here, as I thought that this project might end up being kind of a dud and never end up making it to YouTube, but after a while I got the train back on the tracks, and as you can see here I had done some additional detail painting, including finishing the stripes on the sides. What I did was sand down that floor polish, very carefully masked and painted those additional stripes over top of the silver, and then after that I added some additional details like the panel lines. I applied the floor polish once again, this time waiting like a week for that paint to fully dry. I wasn't able to completely remove all of the cracking and spiderwebs that was there before, but it looks a lot better now, and I think that just verifies that the issue that I experienced the first time was probably due to not waiting long enough for that paint to dry. You really never can wait too long when it comes to these Rust-Oleum enamels, as it seems to take a long time for them to fully dry. I'll try the floor polish method again for a future project and see what kind of results I can get. I don't really feel like it got a fair test on this project, so we'll see how it goes next time. Unfortunately, I once again got some trash into the clear coat, as this time I think there may have been some dust or dirt or something in the brush that I used, but not too bad. For an RC body specifically, I really like that it seems like you can build up that floor polish into a nice thick layer of clear that may help protect the body from crashes and scrapes. Now the 3D printed stencil for that zigzag stripe didn't end up working out. The reason is due to the curvature of the body. When I taped down the stencil so it was snug against it, what ended up happening was the area towards the middle ended up standing up and no longer being tight up against the body. Obviously that wasn't really going to work. What I ended up having to do was 2D print this design onto some sticker paper using a standard printer, and then carefully cut the inside with a hobby knife and applied that sticker to the body and used that as a mask. A little bit of a pain to have to carefully cut out this rather intricate zigzag stripe, but it did end up working out in the end. By no means a perfect paint job here, but it was a learning experience if nothing else, and shortcomings aside, I'm kind of digging the look. Now at this point, there were still a few more painted details to add, which I simply did by hand. I was a little nervous that masking on top of that floor polish was going to peel it off or cause some kind of damage. At this stage, and with how things were going, I decided to play it safe and just do the best I can to freehand all of these remaining details. As I mentioned earlier, the headlights for this car were missing and only one of the taillights was usable. I decided I would go ahead and 3D print my own replacements, taking some measurements both on the car and on the non-damaged taillight piece. Generally, I would go ahead and get out the 3D scanner and get some scans of the body, just as I've showcased on some projects previously. But I decided here I would try to do the low-tech solution of just measuring stuff and eyeballing it the best I can. But this ended up not working out the best, as I had to modify the design of the taillights, and even then they didn't quite fit right, so I had to cut and sand them in order to get them to fit better. I tried to prove that 3D scanning isn't always necessary, but really I think the lesson to be learned is if you have a tool, go ahead and use it, even if it seems like a simple enough part to make without it. It wasn't like I wasted a ton of time and material with these tiny parts, but it was a waste that probably wouldn't have happened if I had 3D scanned the body to begin with. Either way though, I got there in the end. Despite these really not being that great of a fit, I have gone ahead and posted the STL files for them over on our Patreon for anyone who's interested. I wouldn't even necessarily recommend these parts in all honesty, but if for some reason you want them, they're on there. Now, I didn't make a very detailed taillight with the pattern that you would see here on the real thing, and that's because I was going with more of a simplified design, replicating these smoked taillight lens covers that you see here. I figured these would look kinda cool with the custom look I'm going for. I 3D printed these parts using a transparent material, and I was able to achieve that smoked look simply by using a Sharpie. The taillights aren't the only parts on this car that are going to be getting a dangerous level of tint. I also went ahead and painted the backside of all of the windows so you won't be able to look inside and see the lack of interior. Make sure you paint the clear windows on the inside so that when you're looking at them from the outside, it looks nice and smooth, just how you would paint a polycarbonate body for an RC vehicle. Like I said, some trimming and sanding was required to get all of those lights to fit into place, but here's a look at them once they were installed. The taillights may have been a bit of a rough fit and a bit of a compromise, but the headlights actually turned out looking really good. After adding the license plate decal included in the model kit, I also added the mirror pieces to the side view mirrors. Maybe the paint was just a little thick, but I found that the mirror pieces didn't want to fully fit into place how they should, so I just cut off the piece that extended out from the back of the mirrors, and I just applied some glue and set them into place exactly how I wanted. Once that was done, both them and the windows could be installed using not only glue but also some tape to hold those windows in, just for extra strength and to keep everything in place while that glue dries. You won't be able to see inside the car, so it's not like it has to look that tidy on the inside. While the included decal sheet might not have had a huge selection to choose from, I did like the inclusion of this windshield decal. But at this point, the car was complete except for the tailpipes, which I didn't notice until I started filming some of these nice outdoor shots. So it was sort of a very last minute addition to this model, but I think it definitely helps add a final touch of realism. This is a design that we've included in a number of STL files packs, but I'll go ahead and place them below this video over on Patreon in case you'd like to print a set. I think they pair really nicely with this car, kind of giving the look of an aftermarket exhaust having been installed. Just a little bit of steel and matte black paint. I maybe could have gone with chrome, but like I said, I think they turned out looking nice. So as we have a look at the finished car in all of its glory, if you pay close attention to the rear, you'll notice that in some of these shots it has the exhaust, and in some it doesn't. Like I said, sort of a last minute, oops I almost forgot sort of thing, but regardless I'm really happy with how it turned out, and I was able to capture some great shots of the finished model. As far as driving this Camaro, obviously it's working great. It's an FFR SC1 chassis with a 4000 RPM N20 motor, and I was running it with a 2S LiPo battery here while recording this footage. It's pretty much what you would expect. Basically drives like all of the other FFR SC1 chassis I've put together with the FC01 front suspension. Not much traction is provided by those model kit tires, but sometimes that can make these cars even more fun to drive. Not the platform to go with if you want maximum RC performance, but it's certainly fun and it's great seeing your finished model actually cruising around. Just a very fun, simple build, far from being perfect and far from being the most detailed and lifelike vehicle I've put together, but just an all-around enjoyable project, and that's what the hobby is all about at the end of the day. I learned a few things, probably more of what not to do than what I want to do on future projects, but I'll definitely try that floor polish again, either with different paint underneath or letting that paint dry for an extended period of time. I'm sure some of you have used floor polish as a clear before for some of your projects, so if you have any tips or experiences you want to share, I'd love to read them below in the comments. Those thin 3D printed stencils aren't a bad idea, but I think they're only really going to work for either very simple shapes or on flat surfaces. Again, a cutting machine would be ideal if you're going to be doing a lot of custom painting like this and need a bunch of masks. Those machines can cut into sticker paper with a high degree of precision, much easier than having you cut things out the old-fashioned way. Not sure I'm ready to make that investment just yet, but who knows, maybe someday. But let me know what you think of that rad paint job. Should I do some more cars in this style, maybe getting even more ambitious with some future paint jobs? I'm not sure I'd necessarily paint a real car like this, but with these models, it's all about having fun and you might as well get a bit creative. And even if this isn't exactly your style, I appreciate you sticking with me as I showcase this project. I hope you found today's video entertaining and maybe even informative. As always, a huge thanks to all of our channel members and Patreon supporters who help to make these videos possible. I've got some more cool builds on the way, so be sure to subscribe if you're interested in seeing more RC projects like this one. But that's all I've got for today's video. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.